Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Okay. So we got to cut to the chase on the Q&A here. I do want to remind you though that tomorrow morning, Thursday morning, is the Coffee and Coaches conference call. So prepare your coffee, throw up a video, tag me for it on Instagram. And I'll share that, and then we can all hang out together on Zoom, and we'll have a great conversation as we always do on Thursday mornings, 6 a.m. Eastern time. That's Bill Standard Time, if you will. So I appreciate you being there and participating. Let's dive into this question. Maybe the world's simplest question, but one of the coolest things to think about, because it's going to allow us to explain a lot about movement in general. And so it's about squatting. So I got my Batman leg day shirt on that I got from my buddy Flick, because how appropriate, right? We're talking about squatting, leg day, get it? All right, here we go. So Mihail, could you please explain how the mechanics change between a bodyweight squat and a weighted squat? So it appears that there would be a lot of differences, and I think from an appearances standpoint, you're probably right, but what we have to look at here is we have to look at movement principles. So the principles don't change at all. They're exactly the same. What we have are different conditions, and then therefore different contributions of strategies that are going to be applied when we're dealing with something that is just body weight, and then something that has the magnified or amplified load. Right? So we think about how we move through space. So we have two strategies. We have expansion and we have compression, and the interaction of those, so that you're always doing both at the same time. Just certain aspects will be biased towards one and certain aspects will be biased towards another. And so if we think about a body weight squat, I have to maintain my center of gravity. I have to expand in the right place. I have to compress in the right place to achieve a position in space. And so with the weighted squat, the same thing happens. It's just that now I have taken all of the loading based forces. We haven't talked about loading in a long time. We talk about compression all the time. But when we talk about loading, those are the forces that we have to manage. And so with a weighted squat of any kind, we have to manage now those forces as well. So our strategy may change. So real simple, let's look at a back squat and a front squat real quick when we talk about loaded squats. So they're both loaded, but they're not the same. And so by the position of the load, I have to create expansion differently. So if I put a bar on the back of somebody's shoulders, right behind their neck, and I create the compressive strategy on the back side of the upper back, I have to drive more expansion anteriorly, otherwise I would collapse the load. So I fill myself with volume, I compress that volume to make it stiff, and now I can rest a lot of weight on top of that. Okay, if I was in a front squat, I have to get enough distribution anteriorly and posteriorly underneath the weight. So from a shape change perspective, I have to expand myself so that the bar is sitting relatively in the middle of the expansion. Otherwise, I would dump the weight forward if I did not expand anteriorly. But I also have to create a yielding strategy posteriorly to create expansion. So again, I have the weight centered relatively over this cylinder, if you will, of volume that I am squeezing. So again, the shapes are different, but the strategies are the same. It's just this interaction between the compression and the expansion. If I'm sitting down into a deep squat of any kind, I have to have some form of expansive strategy to lower me into that position. If I'm looking at just a body weight squat, I have my weight based on the effects of gravity upon me that will allow my expansion downward in that direction. So I have to expand downward to allow that to occur. So I have to have eccentric orientation in certain areas, and I have to have yielding strategies in certain areas to allow that expansion to occur. If I superimpose a weight on top of that, so now I took a barbell and I put it on your back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have less of an eccentric orientation as a contribution to the expansion and more of a yielding strategy. So I'm going to distribute that load into the connective tissues on a much, much greater level, because if I release the muscles into eccentric orientation, I will accelerate into the ground, which might be okay if I have the capacity to get back out of it based on the load. However, if I put 800 pounds on my back and I accelerate into the ground, I could just become a big wet spot, which would be a bad thing. So again, we have to look at this from compression and expansive strategies. So the shape of my body is going to be based on what the demands are. So if I put a load on me, I have to expand and distribute the shape of my body to support the load. I have to squeeze that load. And again, that's going to create a restriction in movement. So think about it, it's like I want to be more stable underneath a heavy load, so I'm going to use a much more compressive strategy. But I need to be able to move through space to create my squat, which is going to be more of an expansive strategy. So under those circumstances, heavy loads, I yield a little bit more. Less loads, I eccentrically orient a little bit more, but I'm still using both expansive strategies at the same time. To come up out of the squat, it's all about compression. So if I am pushing up out of the body weight squat, I don't have the force demands that I might have under other circumstances. I use my concentric overcoming strategy to come up out of the squat, so I will move more towards an eccentric orientation to a concentric orientation. When I'm in a loaded situation, I don't release the concentric strategy nearly as much. And that's why I have to use the yielding strategy to get me into the bottom of that squat position. Otherwise, I may not be able to stand back up. So I hang on to my compressive strategy. I hang on to more concentric orientation, even as I lower myself into the squat, so I can overcome and push myself up out of a loaded squat. So conceptually, I hope that's a little bit helpful for you to kind of understand how these interactions take place, because I think that some of the biomechanical models are a little bit rigid, if you will, in regards to how these things actually occur, when the reality is, if we look at this thing from two strategies, compression and expansion, it's just an interaction of the two. How do I utilize that? So eccentric orientation, yielding to expand, concentric orientation, overcoming to compress, and that's literally how you're going to move through space. So this squatting thing is a great representation of how those things interact. Hope that's useful. If it's confusing, ask questions. Love the questions coming in. I had to move this one to the front, though. It was such a cool little question. I hope you have a great Wednesday. Tomorrow's Chips and Salsa Day and Coaches Coffee and Coaches conference call. So I hope to see you guys there, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.